Welcome. Today I'm going to show you guys how to play this game, Tiny Towns. So let's get started. So in this game, you're going to be constructing buildings in your town. And each player will get one of these boards here, 4x4. And you're going to be putting resources on these boards and building certain buildings. Like the most common building is this one over here, the cottage, and it's going to require these three different colors here, which is wheat, glass, and brick. So let's say I wanted to build a cottage. I would need to do that particular pattern over there in the corner. So something like perhaps wheat right there, glass right there, and brick right there. Then once I have added my last resource to the pattern to construct the building, I could then take off all of these resources here that I used to create the building, which is the cottage, and then I'd get to put the cottage in one of the spots that I used to construct the building. So I could put it there, for instance. I could put it there. I could also put it there. But remember, you're going to want to utilize as much space as you can, because a lot of these patterns are some of them are easy and simple, and some of them are more complex. And we'll go over each of these cards here. But the point is, at the end of the game, for every empty square that you have, meaning that has no buildings on it, it's worth -1 point at the end of the game. So if you weren't very good at utilizing space, then it's possible you're going to have a lot of minus points being deducted from your score at the end of the game. So you really need to obviously keep track of how you're going to set up the patterns and where they will fit on your board. In the beginning, it's pretty easy to pick a spot and start building, but as the game goes on, you'll have less and less places that you can construct buildings. So that's the basic building that you can build in this game. Now, when you are playing with more than one player, I've played the solo variant. The solo variant is very different, so I'm not going to teach you guys how to play the solo variant in this video. I'm going to teach you guys how to play the game without the solo variant. So if you're playing with, obviously, 2 players or more, this is how it'll work. Each player will get an opportunity several times throughout the game to be the master builder. The player who's the master builder will then decide which resource that we will be putting down on our boards. So let's say the master builder, he is thinking of building a farm first. And he is thinking one of the resources is obviously wood, and the other resource is wheat. So let's say the master builder decides he is going to choose wheat. And then he decides to put his wheat like that, for instance, right there. All the other players that are playing also must pick a wheat cube and put it on their board somewhere. That's what they have to do. So that means the other players will then be forced to start working on buildings that require wheat. And in this game, the only ones that do are farms and cottages. So they'll have to either start working on a cottage or they'll have to start working on a farm as well, because that's what the master builder chose. But then after everybody has put down their resource that they've chosen, or should I say that the master builder chose, after everyone's done that, if there are any buildings that can be constructed, they're automatically constructed. But usually, obviously, the first time you do this, there won't be any buildings constructed. The well, which is you can barely see on the screen, only requires 2 resources to build, so it's possible some players might be building buildings, constructing buildings, before other players for sure. But yes, they'll have to place wheat down. So that means if they were planning on building a tavern first, for instance, they won't be able to put anything down for the tavern. They will have to obviously start working on another building that they weren't planning on building. So the master builder is definitely something that you're going to want to be quite a bit, because everybody has their own idea of how they want to construct their town. And so that's what the master builder will decide. And then after everyone has placed their resources, which was wheat, obviously, because that's what the master builder decided to do, then the master builder token here is handed to the player to the left. And then that player is master builder. And then that player can decide which resource they want to do next. And then all of the other players will do that resource. Maybe the other player, he's the player that was wanting to do the tavern. And so he chooses, I don't know, brick. He chooses brick, right? Okay, so he chose brick. So he puts a brick up here. He says it's brick. All the other players also must do brick. And so the player who chose to start on the farm will now not be able to work on his farm because it does not need brick and can't be utilized with brick. And so now the player will be thinking, do I utilize this space to instead build a cottage instead of a farm? Because, a cottage does need brick. He could do it that way. Or does he think about maybe building something else that requires brick? Like maybe the tavern as well. Or up here is a trading post. That needs brick as well. So it just depends on the player, obviously, what they're going to do. But they have to start placing resources down for a building, even if they weren't planning on building that building. Unless, of course, they have another option that they can start working on that they would like to build. Like I said, this player over here, the first one, was picking the farm to go with. But the other players, maybe they weren't wanting the farm. Maybe they decided to go with the cottage, which still works because they both require at least one wheat cube in order to build. Now, the pattern has to be exact. The resource cubes have to be basically just like it is on the card. So, for instance, it does have to be something like this in order to construct a farm. It's got to look like that before it's built. You can't have it like this, for instance, because that's not the same as that, obviously. Now, you got to pick how you're going to have your board as well. So, but you certainly can't do this, because even though this is the exact same amount of resources, it's not the same pattern. So that is why you have to do it a certain way with the patterns. But then once you got the patterns, you can start building some buildings. And let's kind of go over how the cards work and all that next. So let's go over them. The cottage is a card you always play with this card in the game. So it's the most common card because you'll always play with this cottage in the game. Now, this little green diamond looking thing, that's the victory points in this game. So the cottage is worth 3 victory points if this building is fed. So what does that mean? Okay? Well, on its own, the cottage is worth nothing because it must be fed. So how do you feed a cottage? Well, you have a farm here. The farm feeds 4 buildings anywhere in your town. So if you have 4 cottages, the farm will feed 4 of them. And it doesn't matter where the cottages are on your board. It doesn't matter. It will feed 4. But if you have 5 cottages or 6 cottages, it will only feed 4 of the 6 or the 5. So if you want to feed all of your cottages, because you have more than 4, then you're going to need more than 1 farm to build. And these buildings are for the farm. Now, there are lots of different cards in this game, but you're only going to play with 1 card per building. So you'll have the farm, or maybe something else for this particular building. You'll have different buildings besides the tavern, different buildings besides the chapel. That's the theater, that's a well, that's a trading post. There'll be different buildings for each of those. But you won't play with 2 buildings that have this same type of building in the same game. And each one of the different types of buildings are different. They have different patterns. They do different things, more or less. They give you different points based on different things. So they're all different. So it adds a lot more variety to the game, for sure. So yes, you'll need, for the cottage, you'll need to have wheat, then glass, and brick. You can do it in any order. You could do glass first, then brick, wheat, whatever. It doesn't matter. But you have to do it in this pattern. And it won't be able to construct the building until after the resources have been utilized to build the building, until the resources are actually in the corresponding spots as well. Now, here's another thing to note. Usually, you cannot, once a building has taken a spot on the board, usually you cannot start utilizing other areas. So basically, you won't be able to like put resources on the same building, on the same square as a building that's already been constructed, except for one card. So like I said, if I wanted to, let's say the cottage was here and I wanted to build another cottage right here, I wouldn't be able to do that because there's a building here, okay? So I'd have to do it like here instead. And then I could put a cottage here, here, here when it was done. But yeah, I could do it like that. I wouldn't be able to do it like this, though, for instance. So now, with that said, you can't, utilize areas with buildings to build stuff, except with this card here, the trading post. It's worth 1 victory point at the end of the game, but then you may treat the building that you built, that you constructed, as a wild resource for future buildings. So, let's say you had a trading post, and let me grab one. Here's the trading post, okay? Say the trading post was on this board. Let's say you wanted to build a tavern, okay, and you wanted to utilize these 3 squares here. Let's just say almost all the other squares are utilized, and you can't use them for anything. So, you could do this. You could go like 2 brick, for instance, like that, and this would act as the glass in order to build a tavern. Or you could do it the other way, obviously, also works too. 2 brick and 1 glass on this side, or should I say the trading post, 1 brick and 1 glass to utilize, and then you would be able to create your tavern, obviously, in one of the other 2 spots. You could do that. That would be allowed. But of course, if you're going to go with the trading post, there is something to note. Now, sometimes players will take advantage. They'll have more than 1 trading post nearby, and they'll be like, ooh, I know, I've got 2 right next to each other. I can build a well. Well, you can't, because you wouldn't be able to put the well on the same spot as the trading posts, which means at least 1 resource that creates a certain building will still have to be utilized. You'll still need a spot. So like glass for the tavern, and then you could put, for instance, like that, for instance. So it's a wild resource, but most likely you won't probably get 2 right next to each other like that very often. But, just so you know, you can use the same spot that the trading post is on as a wild resource for the building you're constructing. Of course, the trading post will stay where it is regardless of the case, but it's still something very interesting that could be useful. It is a lot harder and takes more time to build, though, so it might not be something you build first, but you probably shouldn't wait till the last second either, because it does take up a lot of space. So that's how that works. So that's how the trading post works. Now let's look at the tavern. Okay, so the tavern is 2 brick and a glass. Oh, I didn't go over what the trading post requires. So it requires 2 stone. These are stone. It also requires 2 wood and a brick to build. Okay, and then obviously tavern requires 2 brick and 1 glass. So you'll get victory points based on the number of cottages, cottages you've constructed. So here's the cottages. So this gives you a certain amount of points depending on how many cottages are in your town. So if you have 5 cottages in your town, this tavern will be worth 20 points. If you have 4 cottages in your town, the tavern will be worth 14 points. So that's a lot of points. So obviously, building cottages and taverns is a good idea. But you also don't want to forget to build farms and chapels and wells and things like that. So they're all very useful depending on how you build and what you build. So, and like I said, the farm is 2 wheat and 2 wood. Okay, now we just have 3 more cards to look at. So let's look at them. Put these back sort of where they were. So here's the chapel. The chapel is going to require a stone, glass, stone, glass. Okay, and it's worth 1 victory point for each cottage that is fed. So if you have 4 cottages and they're all being fed, this chapel is worth 4 points. That's basically what that means. So that's how that works. And then we have the well. This is the easiest building to build, especially towards the end of the game when you have like hardly any space left. In order to build a well, you need wood and you need stone. You'll get 1 victory point for each adjacent cottage. So if, for instance, the well was right here, there was a cottage here, there was a cottage here, there was a cottage here, and there was a cottage here, those are all adjacent, the well would be worth 4 points. So that's how that works. A maximum of 4 for each well you have, if that is the case. If it was over here in the corner, at most you could only get 2. That means if the well isn't adjacent to any cottages at all, this isn't going to give you a single point. But there was one good thing to note. If you have a well, at least it prevents you from losing points, because for every empty square you have, it's minus 1 point. So if you have a well in a spot, or you can utilize a spot at the end of the game and put a well down, do it, because it won't decrease your score at least. And then we have the theater. So the theater requires this pattern. So we're going to require a wood, a glass, a wood, and a stone. This one is going to give you 1 victory point for each other unique building type in the same row and column as this building, as the theater building, which is this one here. Okay, so what that means is, let's say the theater was over here. Okay, and let's say we had a tavern, and we had one of those, and we had one of those, and we had one of those, and we had one of these as well. Let's just say that's all that's within the same row and column and row. Okay, well, it has 2 of these in the same column and row, basically, right? These are the same, so it's only going to give you 1 point for these. This is different, and that's different. So each of those are going to give you 3 points altogether. So you're going to get 4 points. Even though you have 5 buildings, only 4 of them are unique from each other. And so therefore, you can only get a maximum of 6 points. If there was one down here in the screen, part of the screen you can't see, and it was a different building, then you could possibly get 6 points. That's how that works. Now, another thing that's in this game are these monument cards. Each player is going to get 2 monument cards, and then they get to look at both of them and decide which monument card to keep, because only one of these monuments will be available to each player. You'll never be able to build more than 1 monument in a turn, or in a game for that matter. So, and that is something to note. Each of the monuments do a variety of different things, but if this is your first time playing the game, it's recommended that you don't play with the monuments, because there are a lot of different abilities that change things for sure, if with the monuments. But I'm not going to be playing with monuments in my solo game, but that's the point with the monuments. So it is possible that you could possibly have 6 buildings adjacent, not adjacent, but simply in the same row and in the same column as well. But that's the point. You can get up to 6 points with that card, with that building, depending on how things are. But that's how that works. Now, how does this game end? Okay, we've talked about how you score victory points, and we've talked about the patterns and the different resources and what you can do and what you can't do and all that, and the awesomeness of being the master builder. Well, the game ends when every player can no longer utilize anything on their board, meaning they can't put any more resources down, they can't construct any more buildings. If everything's used up, or the patterns and stuff that they want to build, etc., there isn't anything left, any more space left, then the game is over for every player. Once that happens for every player. So there might be some players who are able to build something at the end of the game, and the others can't. It just depends. Maybe they utilized the cards that took up less space to begin with, like the whale, and they had more whales than other players. They might have more space. They might be taking more time to finish their turn, finishing their game, than the ones who spent their time building the bigger stuff, like the trading posts, and have a few of them, and have a few chapels, and a few theaters, etc. They could possibly, obviously, be closer to finishing than others. But then once everyone is done, that's how the game is over. You'll count up all the points you get, deduct any empty squares, obviously. So that's how this game works. And we'll explain how the solo variant works for this game in the next video. Thank you guys for watching.